Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight, jury deliberations begin in the murder trial of Kyle Rittenhouse after the Antioch teen helped select, albeit randomly, the jury's final composition.
Of course, we're all in the map room that there's a fair amount of disagreement among the aldermen.
Older people hash out the new city ward map. We hear from 4 of them on how the negotiations are going.
Our future is dying.
Parents of Chicago children who were killed band together in a call for action.
A look at what the COP26 climate conference accomplished. We hear from Illinoisans who were there.
Near term, it's flooding and heat waves that I really worry about.
Plus, how has Chicago done in keeping its environmental promises? Carol Marine is back with that story from the DePaul Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence.
An NFT you can think of as an asset, a digital asset that is stored on the blockchain.
And NFTs are all the rage in the art world right now. Chicago has its own NFT gallery. But first, some of today's top stories. The controversial leader of Chicago's police union announces he has officially retired from the Chicago Police Department. John Catanzara's resignation announcement comes after he was facing possible termination following social media posts. Catanzara posted a picture of his personnel action request on his Facebook page, showing that he indeed had retired from the force. His termination hearing had begun yesterday before the Chicago Police Board, but because Catanzara is no longer an officer, he is no longer subject to discipline from the board. Catanzara plans to stay on as president of the Fraternal Order Police Lodge 7 for the remainder of his term. And Mayor Lori Lightfoot nominates Andrea Kirsten to be the leader of Chicago's Civilian Office of Police Accountability, but not everyone's on board. Kirsten currently serves as COPA's interim chief, and she faces backlash from some city council members for recommending a suspension for slain Chicago police officer Ella French for not turning on her camera during the botched raid of Anjanette Young's home. This is a recommendation the mayor herself called, quote, the height of tone deafness just days ago. A letter to the mayor signed by 20 older people says, quote, morale is low, tensions are running high, and COPA releases a report tainting the legacy of fallen officer French and recommending disciplinary action against her. Kirsten's appointment is subject to city council approval, and we'll hear from some older people about this and much more coming up in the program. City officials are claiming Chicago's Vaccine Awareness Day last Friday a victory. More than 8,300 Chicago kids aged 5 to 11 received their first COVID-19 vaccine dose, and more than 20,000 people received a dose across the city altogether. This marks the most doses given to Chicagoans in the last 6 months, according to health officials. The city has so far administered more than 3.5 million COVID vaccinations. And up next, jury deliberations begin in the murder trial of Kyle Rittenhouse, so please stay with us for more.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabie Family, the POLK Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The first day of jury deliberations have come to a close in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. Before those deliberations began, though, Rittenhouse himself helped to choose, albeit randomly, the jurors who'll decide his fate. 18 jurors sat through the trial, but after the numbers of each juror were placed into a raffle drum, Rittenhouse pulled 6 pieces of paper from it to select the jurors that would be dismissed. The final 12 on the jury must now weigh the raft of charges against Rittenhouse for shooting 3 men, killing 2 of them in Kenosha last summer. Here's a little of yesterday's closing arguments.
The defendant decided to pull the trigger on his AR-15 4 times. That was his decision. And he is responsible for every bullet that comes out of that gun. He doesn't get a pass by pulling the trigger fast.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle was not an active shooter. That is a buzzword that the state wants to lash onto because it excuses the actions of that mob.
And joining us now with more are Patrick Cafferty, a Racine-based criminal defense attorney, Paul Bucher, former district attorney of Waukesha County for almost 20 years. He's now in private practice based out of Delafield, Wisconsin. Xavier Pope, lawyer, legal and culture contributor for ESPN Las Vegas and host of Suit Up News. And Joseph Lopez, longtime Chicago criminal defense attorney at Lopez & Lopez. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. So we have to talk about, just moments ago we saw this video of Kyle Rittenhouse drawing the numbers of the jurors who would not deliberate in his case. Paul Bucher, briefly, how unusual is that?
Well, it's the first I've ever seen. They still use the tumbler in some counties. Other counties are a little bit more advanced, and they use a computer that just randomly draws the numbers. But I didn't see it. It's not like he had numbers up his sleeve or there's any stickies on the paper. I think it was just the judge trying to say, hey, look, we're going to make an active part of the trial. I feel sorry for the alternates. I always do. But I wouldn't read more into that than people have. I mean, they think some black helicopter conspiracy is going on. It's no big deal. It's unusual, but a lot of things that have happened in this trial have been unusual.
So let's talk a little bit about the trial. Patrick Cafferty, let's come to you first, please. Your impressions of how both the performances of both the defense and the prosecution in this case, how do you think they did?
The reality of this case is that the case sort of tries itself because there's so much video involved here. So as far as the performance of the sides, they've each done what they were supposed to do. The state has clearly established that Kyle Rittenhouse killed these two people, almost killed another, endangered the lives of the other two. The reality is it's about self-defense versus provocation. The defense has laid out their case for self-defense. Rittenhouse said all the right things. It's a matter of whether the jury is going to believe him. And then it's a matter of whether the state has proven that Rittenhouse provoked the attacks on him and therefore lost the right to use deadly force as the first option. So they've done what they were supposed to do.
Paul Bucher, back to you. What do you make of the various different charges that the prosecution has brought against Rittenhouse?
To be honest with you, way too many. I think I think the case is way overcharged. I've done this for 40 years, 42 years. I've done dozens and dozens of homicides. With all due respect and my condolences to the families, this is a straight up homicide case. If I were in the driver's seat, which I'm not, I would have charged 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of attempted first-degree intentional homicide, knowing you're going into a self-defense case, knowing it's going to be a fist fight and you got to fight your way out of it. But I would have, all those other superfluous charges that they filed. They filed against one individual. They don't even know who he is. He's unnamed. I call him Fanu Lanu, first name unknown, last name unknown. They don't even know who he or she is. They charged a curfew violation, the firearm case. I think they've lost focus on really what this is. This is a homicide case. 2 individuals have lost their life. You need to focus your time and resources on that. And the government lost their focus, in my opinion.
And Xavier Pope, what do you make of these various different charges? What's your impression of this case?
Of course, I respect my fellow counsel here on the panel, but I vehemently disagree with his assessment of the case in terms of being overcharged. We saw the undercharging be the issue with relation to the George Zimmerman case, and if the lesser offense that could have potentially maybe even convicted him. I think that the overcharge, maybe they've been looked at in terms of the gun being a certain amount of inches and there's the battle over that. The jury never saw that go back and forth in terms of dropping that charge. Never had a chance to see any instructions in relation to that charge. It's not necessarily about the intentionality of it. It's whether Kyle Rittenhouse was a vigilante, wannabe EMT who came looking for trouble. And I think the prosecution able to show that during their closing arguments, using video to show that, and to show that his conduct was reckless. I think that probably is the most suitable way to look at this particular case, instead of looking at someone going into a situation, maybe looking to intentionally cause harm to other people. I think that's the place where the sweet spot, where the jury we may find may be more surprising to people than this outcome than people are maybe expecting at this point.
Okay. Joseph Lopez, we even saw Judge Schroeder berating the prosecutor on more than one occasion during this trial. Did you see any obvious missteps by either the prosecution or the defense?
No, I didn't really see any real missteps. I mean, you're not doing your job if you don't get yelled at by the judge. Happens all the time. Happens on both sides all the time. Both sides will violate orders. They'll forget. They'll get really into it. But I didn't see any real missteps. I think that both sides did a great job. They both had good facts, and I think that the presentation by both sides might have been a little dry. It might have been a little, maybe not as much action as other people would like, but they covered the facts on both sides. And I think that this jury can either convict or not convict. It's really a close case, and I think it's too close to call.
Too close to call. So the jury in this case, we know that they are made up of 7 women, 5 men. All of them are white, except there is one person of color, and there's not a lot of clarity on the background of that person. But Xavier, back to you. You know, though we know that both the defendant in this case and the people that he shot are all white, what role do you think race plays in this case?
Well, the person that was shot in order to cause this incident was police shooting of Jacob Blake. And so that was what the whole scenario was around. I think that the jury is pretty clear about what happened before the incident happened. I think with the defense, which he really had a really weak close. He spent a lot of his time not really focusing on the facts in terms of rebutting the specific fact, attacking the prosecutor, calling him a liar, really focused his attention on the politics of the moment, calling them a mob, not any unsubstantiated, showing even framing people in the gas station and what they look like. And I think that is something that he's attempting to play on, maybe implicit bias of the jury. We all know that some of the records around some of the jury bias and things of that nature in this country and some of the criminal justice system. And I think that's what he was still looking to play into, even though the victims were white. So I think it's important to look at that. And also the connection with racialized violence with white people who defend African Americans in the civil rights struggle, also some of the connection with the politics, even of our president being connected to a black president. So I think it's really important to look at race, not just in a vacuum of whether the victims were white and the shooter was white, but also politics around the moment and look at it from a much more broader sense.
Patrick Cafferty, same question to you. Do you think race plays any role in this case?
Honestly, the way that I have viewed politics and race in this case is who's going to end up in the jury box. And we now know who those people are. So we have 7 white women, 4 white men, and 1 Hispanic male. I'm not sure exactly where the people are from, but generally speaking, it's easy to identify what party they affiliate with, depending upon what part of the county they come from. Statistically, white women are more likely to be Democrats, and white men are more likely to be Republicans, Hispanic male more likely to be Democrats. And I bring all this up because so many people have seen this through a political prism, where you have people on the left who say that Kyle Rittenhouse is the poster child for everything that's wrong with gun culture in the United States. You have people on the right who basically say, hey, we should give Kyle Rittenhouse an award for what he did. So I think that those issues will play into the ultimate decision that these jurors make. And it really may come down to the preconceived biases that they brought into the jury box with them. And then once they're there, they see what they want to see. As Joe indicated, there's plenty here for everybody. Both sides were able to make their case. And in a case like that, where both sides have the ammunition to support their positions, it sometimes comes down to just who's in the box, what their preconceived notions are, and how they want to bring this to a close.
And before we run out of time, we know that the defense still trying to get this case thrown out over prosecutorial misconduct is what they're alleging. Paul Bucher, though, who do you think has got to be feeling best about their case right now as the jury deliberates?
I think the defense did not ask for any lesser included or less serious cases. They kind of took the strategy of go big or go home. I do disagree that race or politics has anything to do with this case. I know some of the media is trying to make it into that. I don't think it has anything to do with it. The judge struggled to keep that out. And I believe there was prosecutorial error. I think the prosecution did comment inappropriately on the defendant's post-arrest silence, and that's going to be an appellate issue if he is convicted.
And Joseph Lopez, again, before we're out of time, your thoughts. Who do you think has got to be feeling best about their case right now?
Well, I think the defense is probably feeling the best about their case right now because they were able to use very effectively the prosecution's witnesses as their own witnesses, which is one of the tricks defense lawyers will do. Good defense lawyers will take that bad witness, turn him around, and make him his witness. But it's still an uphill battle. You look at those jury instructions. I don't know if those jurors even understood it. They asked for extra copies today. So it seems that they're very interested in the jury instructions. And I think that what people don't understand is, when you have self-defense, it's not absolute. There are limits to self-defense. You just can't blow people away because you think you're scared. And
that's
that is
where we're
why
going to
I
have
think
to leave
these
it,
jury
though.
instructions are very important.
I appreciate all four of you joining us, Patrick Cafferty, Paul Bucher, Xavier Pope, and Joseph Lopez.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all later.
And now to Paris with some members of City Council. Paris.
Brandis, there are 15 days until the new City Council ward map needs to be approved, or else it goes from the back room to the voters. And here to talk about that and more are Alderman Emma Mitz of the 37th Ward on the west side, Alderman Gilbert Villegas of the 36th Ward on the northwest side and chair of the Latino Caucus, Alderman Jason Irvin, who represents the 28th Ward on the west side and chair of the Black Caucus, and Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor of the 20th Ward on the south side. Welcome back to all of you. I just want to lay out a proposal by the Latino Caucus for a new ward map. It would draw 16 majority African-American wards. That's down from 18. 15 majority Latino wards. That's up from 13, as well as one ward with a majority Asian-American population. That would be up from 0. Alderman Irvin, as head of the Black Caucus, you've said no way, no how on this. What is your proposal?
Our proposal is primarily we're working with the committee on committees and rules as it relates to the process that has been laid out. If we reach a point where we need to produce something, we are ready, willing, and able to do such. But right now, we would like to work with our colleagues to create a map that is equitable to all parties and works for the council as well.
Alderwoman Mitz, if Chicago's Latino population has grown and Chicago's African-American population has fallen over the last 10 years, mathematically, does it make sense to increase Latino majority wards and decrease majority African-American wards?
Actually, we just want to stay with the Voters' Right Act. We don't want to put the minority against each other. And so I think that we can accomplish that goal without having to do that.
Alderman Villegas, you're leading the map charge here with the Latino Caucus. Is there a compromise that you could strike with the Black Caucus or with other members of City Council?
Well, I would say that any time you're talking about legislation, there's always a starting point and then there's an opportunity to compromise. What you saw put forward and proposed by the Latino Caucus was a starting point because there really wasn't anything to really look at. People were talking about a map. We put forward a map. And that really is starting the dialogue. I would suspect that as we get closer to the deadline and we can communicate and have true discussions and compromise, there's always the ability to get to 41. And I look forward to working with my colleagues to try to get there.
Alderman Villegas, is there a map that you would support that would keep 18 majority African-American wards?
I would say this, if my colleague from the Black Caucus can draw 18 wards, legally and allowing the Latino Caucus to have 15 seats. That is something definitely we would be willing to entertain. But the reality is that what we put forward is based on data, the Voting Rights Act, as well as what the citizens of Chicago want. And we haven't seen what the 18 wards look like. But again, if my colleague from the Black Caucus can draw 18 wards, that is something for us to really take into consideration. This is all about compromise. This is all about having serious discussions, and we look forward to having and continuing those discussions.
Part of what outside groups want, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, is to stop dividing up neighborhoods, carving up neighborhoods into multiple wards. You represent part of Englewood, and you share that neighborhood with at least 4 other alder people. So will City Council come together on a map that doesn't divide up neighborhoods?
So they're behind the 8-ball when it comes to this. While I agree that we need to create maps with our community, this thing is due December 1st. And so this is conversation that we should have started having in January, but I totally agree that we should be working with the people. We got to start working behind closed doors and actually include the people we represent in a lot of these conversations. And we're starting to move in that direction, but we're not there. We're just not there. And so as a rookie with no seniority, and I got a loss. Part of my Englewood is empty because of Norfolk Sutherland. And so I have to get population where I can. And unlike some other folks, I'm willing to build those relationships. I got to knock doors. I got to talk to my neighbors. I got to get out the vote. And so for me, I don't have a foot in this game. I have to take what I can, and I'm grateful that the communities that are surrounding me are able to say, here is some folks, because they could afford to give me more people in my ward. So, but we do have to have a real conversation before the next 10 years. We wait till the last minute. We need to start having those conversations right after the census, and we just couldn't because of the time we was in. But people are on point for elected officials and neighbors to work together to create a map that's fair, and that includes everybody.
And part of the arcane rules here are that if no map gets a support of 41 council members, then it'll go to the public for a referendum. Alderman Irvin, is this where this is likely headed?
Well, as my colleague stated, we're not at that point right now. That is always, as you say, the nuclear option. It's probably in everyone's best interest to try to sit down and forge a plan that works. This is the first time that my colleague has stated what he has stated, and that's a challenge. And I'm going to ask my cartographers to see if they're able to meet the challenge that he has put on the table.
You're saying 18 majority African-American wards and 15 majority Latino wards, or 16 majority.
Correct, and I will put that on the table for our cartographer to see what can happen. And so again, this is a very fluid process, as has been stated. It is a legislative process, so we want to work together to try to create what will work for not only the council, but also for the city of Chicago, because again, we are representatives of the people, and who the best people are to help, those that they're representing. So we know the communities, we know the issues, we know the challenges, we also know the concerns. So I believe we're the best ones to make those decisions on behalf of the folks.
Traditionally, and this year is no different, a behind-the-scenes process, and the public, certain public groups believe the public has not had input. Alderwoman Mitz, has the public had enough say in the way these maps are being drawn?
I don't know if I could say the public have had enough say in it. I think that individuals have talked about it. I know I've talked about it at my community meetings. In fact, I had Chairman Irvin to come on and address some of the concerns that residents may have had. But until we get the final picture, then we're still making changes. So I think we're moving in the right direction.
All right, I want to move on to another subject. Alderwoman Taylor, the deadline is today for Mayor Lightfoot to submit a response to the IG report into her office's handling and other offices' handling of the Anjanette Young botched police raid. The mayor told us last night she is instead going to send it back to the IG and recommend it continue its investigation. Should that report be public?
It should be. Taxpayers, if we ultimately are going to pay for a lawsuit that Ms. Young and her attorney have filed, we have a right as citizens who are going to pay for it to see that report. That is correct. And honestly, this is dragged on too long. If the city and Anjanette Young and everybody agrees that her house was wrongfully raided and this was wrong, pay the woman what she owed and be done with it. And then let's talk about legislation, how to do something different. How are we making sure that the police don't do this again? What is in place? And so for me, this is dragged on for too long for something that everybody said is wrong.
Alderman Gilbert Villegas, the mayor's pretty steadfast here on not releasing that report at this point. How far is City Council willing to go to force the release of this report?
I think the more information, as my colleague from the 20th Ward said, the more information that's put out there, the better. This didn't happen under her watch. And so let's just go ahead and figure out what were the issues, what took place. Go ahead and make sure that Ms. Anjanette Young, this does not happen again.
But part of this report is looking at what Mayor Lightfoot's office knew and when about this case.
That's what I'm saying. So this issue didn't even occur under her watch. Sometimes it's the cover-up that's more than what the initial issue is. And so this is exactly what's occurring. Let's bring this forward so that we're not putting ourselves in a position like this again. I mean, to take a look and remember that video of Ms. Anjanette Young, that was something that was very frustrating. I saw my mom, I saw my aunt, I saw my cousins, and it was just disheartening. We have to fix that and make sure that it never occurs again.
All right, Alderwoman Taylor, also today, Mayor Lightfoot announced that there would be a new permanent head of COPA, Andrea Kirsten, who had been the interim head since the former chief, Sidney Roberts, had stepped down. You signed a letter saying, no, you don't like this move. Why are you against this?
What was the purpose of bringing up Officer French? The thought that they dragged this woman and brought her in, this woman is deceased. Her family is still dealing with, we're all dealing with that. She was an officer who actually supported Ms. Young. And so why would she bring that up? And you're just opening up own wounds as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I let me just say this, and I see both sides of this issue. To my understanding, that report was written prior to Mrs. Officer French's death. It is somewhat, and one thing that was stated was that there are no processes or procedures in place in order to redact something like that. I mean, the facts, on one hand, we can't say we want transparency, then in the second hand, say that we want to be able to pick and choose what we take in and keep in a report.
Right, I believe it.
I have to agree.
Okay, go ahead, Alderwoman Mitz, very quickly.
Yeah, I have to agree with my colleagues. I too signed on to the letter, but after learning that the statement was made before Officer French had passed away, put it into a different perspective. And I think it was put out in a way that made the public think that she said these things after Officer French had passed. So that made a big difference.
All right, and we have to leave it at just point of clarification for our audience. You're all referring to the fact that Officer Ella French was mentioned in this Anjanette Young report that COPA put out. Officer Ella French obviously tragically lost her life later in a shooting incident. And our thanks now to Alder people Emma Mitz, Gilbert Villegas, and Jason Irvin, and Jeanette Taylor. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And up next, how has Chicago been faring in the fight against climate change? Carol Marine has the answer coming up.
Spend Saturday evening with the Voices of Chicago. Latino Voices at 6 and Black Voices at 6:30. See you on Saturdays. Chicago is getting hotter. Chicago is getting wetter. And so are city officials adequately confronting climate change? Carol Marine and students at DePaul University's Center for Journalism Integrity and Excellence have spent months digging into that question, and Carol Marine joins us now. Welcome back, Carol. Good to see you.
Thank you, Brandis. Promises have been made across the administrations of 3 mayors, Daley, Emanuel, and now Lightfoot. Our students analyzed hundreds of pages of city records, looked at policy proposals, and spoke with climate specialists and community leaders. What have we learned? Well, that promises are easy to make, but desperately hard to keep.
Let's start with this promise. In 2008, the city proposed to plant 1 million trees by 2020. It was part of a bold and radical plan to help reduce the effects of climate change. But city data, obtained through our open records request, show that failed. According to city documents, in 12 years, just 77,000 trees were planted, not 1 million. In the end, the city reached less than 10% of its stated goal. This map we created based on city-provided data depicts where trees were planted and shows most ended up in predominantly white wards on the north side. The least number of trees were planted in the predominantly Hispanic 22nd Ward on the southwest side, which includes Little Village. Only 260 trees there. Angela Tovar is Mayor Lightfoot's point person for the environment.
So if you are a homeowner, you can call 311 and request that a tree is planted in your community. Typically, more affluent communities have used that resource the most. Perhaps the program or the visibility of the program wasn't applied equitably in the past. We have the opportunity to change that.
In 2008, Mayor Richard M. Daley unveiled the Chicago Climate Action Plan. 60 pages of objectives aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions and flooding, in part by planting those 1 million trees.
The goals were, I'd say a lot of them were dashed.
Suzanne Malik McKenna was a co-author of the 2008 plan.
We had 72 actions amidst 5 different categories, like renewable energy, waste and industrial pollution.
She eventually became the city's Commissioner of Environment in the Daley administration, overseeing the Climate Action Plan. But
that kind of came to a crashing halt when the new mayor came along.
The new mayor was Rahm Emanuel, who eliminated the city's Department of Environment, arguing there were more fiscally sound and efficient ways to address climate change, including, he told us, shuttering coal-fired plants by using other existing city departments. But environmental activist Kim Wasserman says her community is frustrated by every mayor, from Daley to Emmanuel and now Lightfoot, when it comes to comprehensive environmental policy.
We've been asking for environmental justice reforms. It has not happened.
Wasserman, head of the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, is particularly distressed about flooding. Why is flooding a problem?
When it rains, you have intersections, crosswalks, house basements that are continually flooding in our neighborhood. These homeowners and renters are feeling it because they're seeing more and more floods in their living spaces on a regular basis.
The city acknowledges that there is not yet a city-sponsored solution to that persistent problem for homeowners.
So we do not have a program right now. What we can do is continue to push for that program, which is why we've dedicated that money through our budget investments now.
Wasserman says she has a good working relationship with Angela Tovar. Nonetheless,
they can hear us all they want, but whether or not they take action on what we say is a completely different thing.
We want to work with community members and leaders to really evaluate how we can best serve people on the environment.
This fall, Mayor Lori Lightfoot allocated $188 million to address climate change in her 2022 budget,
which represents the largest one-time investment in climate mitigation, adaptation, and environmental justice priorities in the city's history.
Front and center in that new budget are trees, as it was in the Daley administration. Lightfoot is proposing 75,000 new trees in the next 5 years. Still, there are many other climate challenges. In late October, the city was battered by high winds and heavy rain. Many scientists worry Chicago is getting wetter and warmer, increasing the likelihood of environmental extremes.
Near term, it's flooding and heat waves that really worry about.
The University of Illinois' Don Woobles is one of the country's top climate scientists.
There's no question. This is one of the most important issues facing humanity, and Chicago needs to know how to deal with its future.
We could have 30 days of 100-degree temperature and 90 days of 90-degree temperature by 2070. That's, right? Imagine that on our region, right? More air conditioning. There's all these different issues.
Mayors come and go, and so do ambitious plans. But scientists say if environmental policy does not become environmental law, the effects of climate change will only worsen.
I don't know whether planting 1 million trees is the right goal or not. That's not the point. But we need to have a series of goals that allow us to meet those mitigation and adaptation responses that we need to be doing.
Are you optimistic? Pessimistic?
I seriously believe that we as humans know how to deal with serious problems. We've shown that in the past. Sometimes we have to be kicked hard to do it.
In September, Governor Pritzker signed a new state law to eliminate carbon emissions by 2050. Mayor Lightfoot has added her name to a regional climate change initiative. Brandis.
And Carol, Mayor Lightfoot campaigned on restoring the Department of the Environment. Where does that stand?
Well, so far she has not done so. Angela Tovar says it remains a goal, but it is an unrealized goal. And one final note, we have to thank Ben Welsh. He's a former DePaul graduate who has helped us with data surveying with our students, has gone through all of the data analysis. Ben is a Pulitzer Prize winning data specialist from the LA Times. We're lucky to have him helping us at DePaul.
Excellent. Congratulations to Ben. And as always, good to see you back in studio.
Thank you.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, more on climate change. Illinoisans made it to the world stage at the COP26 climate conference, what global leaders learned from local environmental advocates. Parents of children who were killed demand steeper penalties for killing kids, including bringing back the death penalty. And are NFTs a passing fad or the next big thing? We step inside Chicago's first physical NFT gallery and one of the first of its kind in the world. But first, some more of today's top stories. The Chicago Board of Ethics unanimously asks the city's watchdog to probe whether Alderperson Jim Gardner violated an ethics ordinance twice. The board determined in September that Gardner used his office to retaliate against his political foes, but his attorney objected. Now, based on factual issues raised by Gardner's attorney, the board voted 5-0 to ask Chicago's Inspector General to conduct a full factual investigation, according to the board's records. Public health officials say kids are becoming most likely to be diagnosed with COVID-19. This as more adults are getting vaccinated.
As of today, the highest case rate in Chicago is actually in unvaccinated 12 to 17-year-olds. This is new. We were not seeing a lot of children, being at the highest risk. And it really is these unvaccinated teenagers that are right now a big part of what's driving this increase and remains a real focus for the department and for all of the schools in Chicago.
Chicago Public Schools have seen a 30% increase in COVID cases since late October, which mirrors the city's 30% increase in cases overall, according to the city's top doc. The city is currently averaging 445 cases per day, up 10% from last week. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks. Illinois has intentionally reduced its prison population and made changes to sentencing laws to reduce offenders' time behind bars. Now, some victims' family members are calling for the state to reverse directions when it comes to those who murder children. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Paris, a lot of changes are coming to Illinois' criminal justice system. There's that effort to reduce the prison population that you mentioned. And then also in January, a new law that's going to be intermittently taking effect that was pushed by Illinois' black legislators that does things like eliminating cash bail, making it easier to decertify police, and then also give those who are detained more rights. Now, State Representative LaShawn Ford says that he realizes his plan to stiffen penalties breaks from that trend. He is pushing to make killing a child a capital offense.
A capital offense means that you will go to jail for life or you will be put to death for the killing of a baby in the state of Illinois.
Ford introduced his plan alongside the parents of a 4-year-old boy killed in September while he was getting his hair braided in Woodlawn.
He was shot in front of me, 2 bullets to the head, and enough is enough. We don't even live in that area. We was out helping a friend of mine from college. I'm a college graduate, engineering degree, and I'm just living my life trying to do right for me and my family, and what happened to my son, I wouldn't wish on anybody.
Moultrie says he's an 80s baby born and raised in Chicago, who went to Alabama for college, and he never says he would have come back, brought his family to the city of Chicago had he known what would happen to his son, Michael James Moultrie Jr. It is hard for him and Michael's mother to talk about it, and yet they are determined to.
It's been over 70 days. 70 days since they took my boy from me. Thank you. He was our only son. He was smart. He is brilliant. He had manners. He was respectful. And he was loved by everyone that he met.
More than 70 days later, no charges filed, no arrests. Craig says with her son taken from her, she has nothing left. She has no choice but to be fearless, spending her days knocking on neighbors' doors trying to hunt Michael's killer. Greg describes it as giving purpose to her pain. Through that work, she has gotten to know the mother of Miguel Angel Rios, who was shot last July after visiting a friend in Little Village.
It's been 1 year and 4 months for me. This message is for the killer. You destroyed my life. You took a good boy. My son was a good kid.
Illinois abolished the capital punishment in 2011, but Representative Ford says he wants the U.S. Attorney's Office to take on cases of child victims. The death penalty is still legal for federal prosecutions. He believes it will deter criminals who now know, he says, that they can get away with murder. While he's personally against the death penalty in concept, he says victims' families at least deserve for officials to reignite this conversation.
Something has to be done. And so that's what I'm working on as well. The reason you guys are able to hide, the reason you guys don't have to come forward and you feel very comfortable shooting children and going back home and laying at night is because the laws need to change. The justice system has failed these children.
I just think this is unfair. These criminals are out there destroying families and they could get away with it. Something needs to be changed. I know there's nothing that's gonna bring my child back, but I'm going to continue fighting for my son's justice. My son did not deserve what they did to him. My son was a great kid. He was a hardworking young man. And if you did the crime, you could do the time.
If you a man, you can put a gun in your hand, step up, take your bid like a man. Because I'm taking mine like a man, and I'm dealing with it every day.
Now, the action that they are pressing for, we don't have precise language yet. Ford is still drafting that bill, but he says that it is going to be a big part of his work as the chair of the Illinois House Violence Prevention Task Force. He also is seeking funding for witness protection. With that, Paris, back to you after that heartbreaking story.
Certainly heartbreaking and compelling testimony from everybody you interviewed there. All right, Amanda, thank you so much. And coming up, what's next for world leaders and scientists on the climate change front? But first, we take a look at the weather. Illinois scientists, researchers, and activists took the world stage this month at the COP26 Climate Conference. Last Friday, the two-week-long meeting wrapped up. World leaders agreed to some goals like keeping the global temperature from varying more than 1.5 degrees Celsius to calling upon countries to move toward lower emission sources of energy. So what impact did local environmental advocates at the conference have on leaders and policymakers from around the world? Joining us are three people who attended COP26. Lily Aaron, a senior at Evanston Township High School and a member of It's Our Future, which is part of the Oak Park-based environmental nonprofit 7 Generations Ahead. Aaron Dernbaugh, Director of Sustainability at Loyola University Chicago. And Vernita Pearl-Fort, a member of the Board of Directors of the Center for United Nations Constitutional Research and ecologist, economist, and research scholar at the University of Illinois Global Institute in Urbana-Champaign. And she's still in Glasgow, Scotland this evening joining us. We thank you all for being here. Aaron Dernbaugh, I'll start with you. What are the tangible takeaways from COP26?
Thanks, Paris. Thanks for having us on this evening. I think we can look at it in a number of different ways, and I think it's probably not fair to get too judgmental on where was it a success or was it a failure. There are certainly those on both sides. You know, holding that meeting up as an expectation of what should be taking place globally is probably not fair. The actual goal is that you're bringing together 197 countries to try to agree on something over the course of 2 weeks, and they're negotiating, crafting agreements, and making commitments to track and report emissions. And that process did move forward, so that was successful.
So, all those delegates, we see President Biden there right now. Lily, in your view, how did world leaders handle creating goals to combat climate change?
I believe that there are a number of things that went well. I think that in terms of mobilizing on 1.5, that is definitely a priority, and I know that it was brought up for a lot of time during the conference itself. I think that in terms of highlighting Indigenous leadership, especially youth perspective, activists from the Global South, BIPOC, marginalized communities across the board, I think that since these people are at the forefront of this crisis, highlighting their perspectives and making sure that they have a spot at the table is something that is absolutely crucial to forming policy that is intersectional and all-encompassing.
Vernita Pearl-Ford, what about that? Do you believe that the outcomes here are sufficient to tackle the crisis at hand? You might be on mute. There we are.
Thank you. It's not sufficient. It's a process. The good thing that happened is that voices from around the world gathered in Glasgow. Many different groups from academia to people who are activists, people who are scholars coming together to say, this is the kind of world that we want. Part of the complaint, however, was that they could not participate in the actual negotiations. It's a statement about the democratic process or the absence of a democratic process in coming to decision making. And it's in that space where the organization on which I serve as a board member, the Center for United Nations Constitutional Research, believes it is very important for us to revisit the United Nations Charter. That charter was created in 1945, 76 years ago, with 50 nations. And the majority of the Black world, for example, was not permitted as a result of colonization and as a result of Jim Crow. W.B. Du Bois wanted to come. They finally let it come, and NAACP in 1945, but as an observer. Now we have 193 nations, part of the UN, and that United Nations came into being in 1945 at the end of World War II. And that was a crisis. This crisis is even greater. There is a clause in the charter that actually says that we have the right, Article 109, to review and possibly alter this charter. It would give us the opportunity to actually put in binding legislation, perhaps to establish an environmental court to address many of the things that have not been addressed today.
All right, so you're calling for big changes to the United Nations Charter there to bring in more countries here on climate change. Aaron, I want to go back to you. One of the things that was agreed on was the acknowledgement that fossil fuels are a huge contributor and a commitment to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, there were a number of agreements, a number of announcements, and some of those were made up between just smaller groups of organizations or smaller groups of countries. But there were two that really stuck out to me. One of them, one of the most important ones, is that the countries need to come back to COP next year, which will be taking place this time next year in Egypt, to share more ambitious emissions reduction goals, not in 2025 when that was originally scheduled. And so I think urgency and ambition is being heard and trying to be accommodated within a pretty sticky process. Also, the final document, the Glasgow Climate Pact, had specific language, I think this is what you're referring to, which included calling for a, quote, phase out of unabated coal power and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, unquote. And that's the first time in 25 years of these meetings, more than 25 years, that we call out the primary source of global warming in the fossil fuel sector. And so I think that's significant.
So it's just progress there, perhaps more progress needed. Lily, Aaron, as we mentioned, all three of you were at this conference. Tell us about your experience there.
I had a wonderful experience. I primarily do a lot of grassroots organizing. So in terms of federal organizing and delving into global policy, it's something that has been really new to me and has been, as a senior in high school, a really eye-opening experience. I do have to admit, though, in terms of representation at actual negotiating tables, I feel that youth, BIPOC, the disabled community, indigenous leadership, and again, marginalized communities across the board have been sorely misrepresented, where global leaders are actually delving into the nitty-gritty of legitimate policy. But then again, I feel that in terms of bringing folks together from all over the world to mobilize in the name of climate justice, it served as an amazing opportunity.
Vernita Pearl-Ford, one of the disagreements here is on how much that developed nations should compensate developing nations, especially coastal nations that face rising sea levels as a result of climate change. How much compensation there should be? What needs to be done on that front?
Yes, the term of loss and damage is used to discuss that. Right now, people talk about climate change in the future. People are suffering and dying today as a result of climate change. and the first hit and the hardest hit often are in the global South. So also these countries are being asked to pay for what they did not create in many respects. And so what is the funding pool that will be available so that people can at minimum survive and then hopefully to thrive and prosper? But emissions have to come down in the North. Prosperity has to increase in the South. And so that is going to be the big debate. I do believe coming to the United Nations Charter will also give another platform for discourse to discuss how do we do this. We are at a great turning right now.
All right, well, still much more to come on this, much more to talk about. And our thanks to Aaron Dernbaugh, Lily Aaron, and Vernita Pearl-Fort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Non-fungible. By definition, the word suggests something unique or irreplaceable. Therefore, non-fungible tokens are, in a way, one-of-a-kind works of art. Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia recently visited an NFT art gallery in Wicker Park that is the first of its kind.
I'm Not Art isn't your everyday art gallery. Forget physical paintings or sculptures. In this space, screens display digital art, more specifically, NFTs, or non-fungible tokens.
An NFT you can think of as an asset, a digital asset that is stored on the blockchain or secured on the blockchain. And so that asset can really represent anything. In an art gallery like I'm Not Art here, it can represent a piece of art. So that can be a video file, an image file.
NFTs are kept on the blockchain, the digital ledger used for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum. Most NFTs are part of the Ethereum blockchain.
The good thing about those lines, if some are messed up, you can straighten them a little bit.
I'm Not Art opened its doors last summer. Owner Matthew Shapiro says it's Chicago's first physical NFT gallery and one of the first in the world.
As this kind of NFT boom was happening, since kind of the beginning of this year, saw a really big opportunity to create something in the space that we thought would be a little bit different than some of the other things. And the idea of really building a community.
We're watching the closing of the auction, which closes in an hour.
NFTs made headlines last March when the artist Beeple sold one for $69 million at Christie's auction house. He just sold another one for $28.9 million last week.
So I wanted to take locations in Chicago that all Chicagoans could have a connection to and bring them to life with one line.
Local artist Sinclair was featured in a recent I'm Not Art exhibit showcasing local NFT artists. He says copying and pasting NFTs doesn't hinder the art form.
If you're screenshotting or screen recording my videos and posting them as your own, that's only bringing more advertisement to me and more prestige to the artwork.
I have some of these postcards, and then I have these kind of pigeons, which are also like an iconic thing in the city that you see them everywhere.
Willia Zway is another local NFT artist. She pursued digital art after leaving an LA architecture job in late 2019.
At the beginning of 2020, pandemic started, and I had a lot of free time by my own, so I was trying to think of another kind of creative outlet that I can utilize what I learned from my previous experience in the architecture world into something new.
At the I'm Not Art exhibit, Zway's work, Until We Meet Again, sold for $2.92 Ethereum, a current value of more than $12,000. Tonight, the gallery is hosting an NFT drop for artist Brendan Fernandez. What is an NFT drop? It's basically the public release of minted NFTs for collectors to purchase. Minting an NFT puts it on the blockchain, but also consumes a great deal of energy through computational power. Artist Brendan Fernandez says he's aware of the environmental concerns surrounding NFTs.
2% of this drop will go to sustainability, looking through different sources to generate, building a community, but also supporting growing trees and taking care of the kind of environmental issues that this is coming with.
As for the future of I'm Not Art, Shapiro says he hopes to buy the Wicker Park building they're in and continue operating in the digital landscape known as the metaverse, where anyone in the world can virtually visit the gallery.
What we've seen in the pandemic with the adoption of Zoom and all these different things is that like the digital social experience is important. And this is, the metaverse, we think, is kind of a real cool extension of that. It's a combination of video games with Zoom in some type of way and some sort of player-controlled world.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Evan Garcia.
And I'm Not Art is open to the public daily from noon to 4 p.m. and around the clock, of course, in the metaverse. Online, you can also bid on NFTs in the Souvenir Project by Brendan Fernandez. You can visit our website to learn more. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabie Family, the POLK Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Tuesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm representing dozens of families in the crash of a Boeing 737 MAX 8 jet. Mr. Clifford is the lead counsel in litigation in federal court in Chicago.